Listening to the stories about people's lives can be fascinating. On today's show, we will talk with two people who listen and record these stories. Stay with us.
Programming is supported by NIPSCO. Today's young minds are constantly reimagining what our world will be like tomorrow. That's why NIPSCO is upgrading its infrastructure now, so we're ready for whatever comes next. More information at nipsco.com/future.
Welcome again to Lakeshore Focus, a weekly show highlighting the key issues, important events, and interesting people in our region. I'm Keith Kirkpatrick. Before humans could create written language and record their history, people told stories and passed them from generation to generation. We are rediscovering the value of spoken history and gathering stories from a wider variety of people. On today's show, we have two faculty from Valparaiso University who are capturing some of this history through the Welcome Project, which they have founded. Let's meet Liz Werfel, who is an Associate Professor of Art, and Allison Schutte, an Associate Professor of English. Again, both from Valparaiso University. Now, you guys are also co-directors of the Welcome Project, right?
That's correct.
Do you have any other titles that I need to know about? That's plenty?
Yep.
So, and you're kind of like bookends with both being associate professor.
Yes.
Associate professor. Mm-hmm. I know that's real important to get the distinction, isn't it?
It just means we get to breathe a little bit easier now.
That's true. So how long have you both been at VU?
I started teaching in 2005.
Okay.
2006.
2006. So I have to do the math now, right? So
yes,
11
that's
years
right.
and 12 because you're in English and art and math is not the thing, right? No. I heard you count before, so I know you guys can both handle that. So besides your teaching duties, what made you form this project like 7 years ago? Where'd that come from?
So Valparaiso University had me in Beijing for 3 semesters in a row. It was a kind of bridge program where Chinese students who wanted to matriculate into our school would have a semester there where they acclimatized to Western academia, the practices. So I got to know a number of them then. And when I was back here on campus, they kept in touch with me, of course. And one of them came up to me once and had a story. And the story was he was walking down the road one night and 2 guys drove up next to him, shouted obscenities at him specifically for being Chinese, and then drove off. And he said, I kind of expect it given the history of the US and the fact that it's lots of different kinds of people coming together, but it was at night. In the US you can own a gun and carry it with you, so I was scared. And that same week I had a freshman American student, very traditional Valpo student, who wrote an informal writing assignment that was about living in what she dubbed the international dorm and having to deal with, quote, those Asians and their greasy, noodly, messy food. I'm not racist, but da 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 da. So these 2 stories in the same week prompted me to think, of course I felt empathy and compassion for the Chinese student, but I also understood that this American student was feeling a culture shock of her own for the first time in her life, potentially. And so I thought,
did you deal with both of them, or in different ways? I assume. What did you do with the young man?
With him, I asked if there was anything I could do, and he said he just wanted to share his story. But what it did prompt me to do is start collecting stories. And so I went first to a committee on campus that was thinking about these things, diversity and inclusion, and pitched the project to them. And that's how it started.
And how did you get involved in it then?
Yeah, so at the time that Liz was hearing the stories from the students, the university was also putting forth its new strategic plan, and that was in part to grow from 4,000 students to 6,000 students, and we were being told that would be largely through international students and then recruiting students of color, maybe from the region even. And I was teaching in our first year program, like all of our first year students have to take, we call it core. And realizing that when we were talking about people that were different than what Liz called the traditional Valpo student, who would be white, Midwestern, middle class, probably from a religious, maybe a town itself that was fairly homogenous. Those students were not necessarily having a vocabulary for talking about, like when they encountered someone different from them, what that meant. If they reacted very strongly, they were unsure how to process that or talk about it. So it seemed like this incoming class of students that was at the beginning of the university trying to grow and diversify, we really were going to need to come up with ways of talking to each other about how we were reacting when we met each other.
These were like two things happening at the same time. So when did the two of you connect to say we need to like do something more formal together?
I think I said, hey,
asked
will
me.
you work on this project? And she said no.
I said, no, I have too many things I'm already doing. And then my students, it really was
Obviously
my
she was
students.
persuasive or something happened, right?
Yeah, it was my students. I realized that they needed some help, and I didn't know how to help them yet. So I thought, okay, I'm going to get involved in this project, because we're not only collecting people's stories, we're also then sharing them again in classrooms, presentations, workshops, and asking people to talk to each other about what they hear.
So why is it called the Welcome Project? I mean, this is trying to help welcome people to the campus?
I think it's more about maybe welcoming you into a story. So if I have a story to share, I'm welcoming you into it. But I think it also came out of the President Heckler's language around we want to be an inclusive and welcoming environment. So a little bit of both.
So give me the practical side of this. So who's listening to what story to what outcome? Who's listening to what? So are you talking about the traditional Valpo student listening to the stories from the international students, or the international students listening to the traditional stories, to the traditional students' stories? Or is it both?
It's definitely a mixture. If you're talking about who's interviewing and collecting the story in the first place, we've done that. I've used it as an assignment in classes where students are doing it with each other. We've had volunteers who have done it for us. But if you're thinking about the edited interview and then who listens to that story, that's a diverse group of people. It can happen in a classroom. It can happen, we've done it at like Chamber of Commerce or Rotary meetings, at the United Way. We've done it in community conversations where we try to gather the audience from both Lake and Porter counties. So yeah, I mean, there's a variety of ways that people are hearing stories, but I don't know if you're asking about when the story's collected or when it's presented in an edited form.
Well, a bit of both, but probably more about the use of it, because it sounds like it's a teaching tool. And I mean, I could go back to your two stories, Liz. I could see why a traditional student at VU, as you described it, hearing the story from this young man who's Chinese, telling what happened to him, could create an interesting conversation for them to hear. And he might be more cautious at telling that if he had to tell it face to face. And then vice versa, this young lady who was like, wow, I come from this homogenous community and I'm here with all these people who are very different than me, and it's very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And for the Chinese students or the other students to hear that, wow, these Americans are trying to adjust to us too. And that becomes a teaching tool. Have I got this right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is how it works. And so you make this available to faculty and to use these different stories.
Yeah, we put all of our edited stories online on our site. It's welcomeproject.valpo.edu, and then we have a Facebook page and an Instagram account where we're doing social media around it. And we have heard from colleagues not just at Valparaiso University but other institutions who are using it as part of their curriculum, and hopefully that's also happening in other kinds of avenues like civic conversations.
I would assume that you do this because of for maybe two reasons. One is you've got people who probably aren't really good necessarily at speaking in front of a group, so they can't really, and then maybe they're a little apprehensive of sharing their true feelings, but you could capture that on video. Is that true? And how do you capture that? How do you get them to be really genuine on video?
So I think to answer the first part of the question, having a kind of sit-down conversation with someone, it's more of a conversation than an interview even. Mm-hmm. And so I think the kind of intimacy that can happen there is something that can't always happen if you're speaking in front of an audience. And I also think that the way the story is then heard, it's a little bit less risky for the individual who's telling their story because they're one step removed when that story is then shared with an audience. And likewise, the participants we have who are having conversations about the stories they hear, I think are less likely to take a polarized position and more likely to reflect on, oh, this is someone's experience. And maybe I can enter into their shoes for a moment to figure out what it feels like.
This sounds like a very powerful tool, actually. Now, you guys began to expand this beyond VU, though, I think, right?
Yeah.
How'd that happen?
So when we initially started, we had this question of when do you feel like you belong, when do you feel like you don't belong on campus? And we realized through some of the stories we heard from a variety of students that some of their experiences of not belonging were happening outside the boundaries of the campus in the community. And so we realized that that border between campus and community is pretty porous. And so if we want to talk about how do we live well together, we're actually going to need to think about how are the residents of the city experiencing and encountering those of us on campus and vice versa. So then we began to start collecting stories from people in the city of Valparaiso about their experiences with, well, what do you think it takes to live well together? What's an experience you've had where you haven't belonged or you have?
And then that led us to the fact that people in Valparaiso or Porter County are often people who grew up in Gary or Lake County and moved. So we started to get that story of migration from Gary during the deindustrialization of Gary out to Valparaiso, to Portage, to Maryville. So it became a kind of not just singular oral history project, but then a regional one.
Can you both tell me about one of the interviews you either conducted, one of the conversations you've conducted, or have seen that just really had an impact on you personally?
There's so many to choose from. So
But you have to pick one.
we've interviewed 250 people now.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
250.
Yeah.
So think of just maybe randomly one that just like, wow, this really had an impact on me personally.
Well, okay, this is one way to answer the question, and it's not to focus on a single interview, but as we started interviewing people specifically about their life in Northwest Indiana and thinking about what does it mean to be good neighbors to each other, I was struck as we interviewed people, whether they stayed in Gary, they and their family stayed in Gary, or where they left Gary, that period during the 50s and 60s of growing up in neighborhoods, and it didn't matter whether it was an all-black neighborhood or if it was like the Polish neighborhood or whether it was like Horace Mann, there was this real rich sense of neighborhood life and like all of the parents equally invested in raising the kids and the kids getting to run free through the streets in the summer, and they were able to stay out until the lights went on and then they heard their moms calling them home. And I was surprised at how, despite the differences in like racial or ethnic background or socioeconomic background, that was a shared story. And it was very powerful for the people who had it. You could hear some of its nostalgia, but also just like a real sense of this was what a rich neighborhood life was like, and then people reflecting on how that's changed. So,
Well, you know, that's interesting. You get to hear the story and see that thread. How does that thread get conveyed out to a broader audience so they could say, you know, all of you who were raised kind of in this area were raised in a very similar kind of way. How do they get it? I mean, you got it because you saw it, but how do you convey that to somebody else?
I think one of the things we hope that having it online does is people can connect to stories through tags across the story. So they might focus on neighborhood life, and you could click on the neighborhood life tag and then hear a number of other stories that have that same theme. But one of our aspirations, we just got an NEH grant to begin the planning stage, and this is a cross-institution with IUN, IUPUI, Valpo, and a number of civic organizations, to create a more robust website that's interactive, documentary, and it would help us do that by visualizing Northwest Indiana and the migration and embedding stories within that and have historical connections to it too. So there it wouldn't just be, here's one story and that's all I get. It's, here's a story next to this story, next to this story. So it creates almost like a chorus where we can hear from lots of people.
So then people can see those threads or those comparisons.
Yeah.
So Allison, I loved your explanation of how that all ties together. And I think one of the videos I watched was one of the ones you were almost referring to about that life of the common life that everybody shared. And I remember the guy saying, and Mom, you had to stay within the sound of your mother's voice or you were in trouble. Or for somebody else's mother's voice, when you heard the mother's voice, it was time for everybody to go home. So that was kind of an interesting piece to it. But I'm still going to ask you to share a story, maybe one, that really personally affected you. I mean, you watch it and it really was an aha moment or like, wow, that affected me. Got to think of one.
So the tricky thing is it's always the one I'm editing right now. So the one I'm editing right now is Billy Foster, who's a great jazz pianist.
Right. I know him.
Yeah. So we interviewed, it was probably close to a 2-hour interview, and he took us all the way back to when he was born and the fact that his parents took him into Chicago to hear the great jazz, Sarah Vaughan and all the great jazz musicians. And that Gary had such a vibrant musical scene when he was growing up that once he got out of college, he started a band and that, he calls it rubbing elbows to learn about jazz, and would go from his gig, and they would, as soon as they got a break, they would run across, to the next club over to just listen for a while until they had to run back to theirs to play again. He talks about having a piano on, his mom got a piano for him on his front porch, and so he would have to practice after school for an hour a day, and all his friends would come up and ride up and say, Billy, are you done yet? Can you come play? And
so how do you pull from a 2-hour interview the nuggets, the pieces of that for someone to watch and boil it down to something smaller? Because we know today attention span's not real big, right? So you can't do the Billy Foster life story because people probably go, oh. So how do you decide what to pull out of that?
I look for themes, and so it's tricky. And in some, maybe we get one story out of an hour and a half. But with Billy, there's so much richness, and the story is developed in a couple of different themes. And so I have a kind of childhood theme that relates to race, but also the neighborhood quality that he experienced, and then music and jazz, and then cancer that he has struggled with. So those three have a thread, so I'm going to do a 3-part video. So you can watch one part and then move to the next.
So that's the answer, you take it all, right?
That's right.
So,
but I actually think too, besides that, or another way of saying what you're saying is each of our initiatives have particular objectives. And so usually what pops out of the interview is what's going to help us help others think about. So in the case of campus, like how do you live with somebody in your dormitory? So we would pull from an interview an episode that would be provocative for them in thinking about like, well, how would you have dealt with this if it happened on your floor? Now that you've heard how it impacted somebody, what would you want to do differently than maybe some of the other people in the story did? Or we did the Invisible Project, which is an initiative with several agencies in Porter County that work to end homelessness. And for that, like our main objective was really demonstrating how who we assume to be homeless is not actually who's experiencing homelessness. And so we wanted to bust some of those stereotypes. And so we would choose from the interviews moments that really demonstrated just the humanity of the people who are experiencing homelessness and challenged us to really reconsider why we assume homelessness is only a panhandler, or why we assume people who use welfare are abusing it or getting stuck and not using it as a stepping stool out. So we often actually do have particular aims that we want to help people really move their thinking. And so that will help us too.
So you both have full-time teaching loads, so why do you do this? I mean, this has got to be a lot of extra work based on what you're telling me, 250 interviews. Not that you've done them all, I get that, other people are doing and helping, but still, just overseeing this project. Why are you doing this?
I think for me, it's part of creative work. As an artist, I'm always wanting to do things and make things in the world that I think are valuable or that hopefully some people see that way. And so this is one act of my creative work. I guess on a bigger scale, I hope that it helps us talk to each other better. And that particularly this regional initiative, that we can start thinking about how to be good neighbors to each other across county lines or across social divisions. But primarily, I just love hearing people's stories and then getting a chance to help craft it.
And we need that good neighbors thing and getting along really a whole lot today, don't we?
Yeah.
I mean, it
In our
seems
world.
even more necessary now because of how divisive conversation has become at a political level or a social level. Yeah. So I think there's a strong investment in the project because we understand the impact it could potentially have on helping people address their neighbor in a neighborly way and approach them with curiosity as opposed to defensiveness or combativeness.
Well, one of the things we should have learned from this last election is we evidently don't really truly understand how people think and what they're thinking, and a lot of people aren't sharing their stories and why they've come to this certain spot in their life.
I think it's hard to see beyond how you're impacted by a government policy or and so to have to hear how another person experiences it, then you begin to understand that your way of seeing things is not the only way, and so not that should diminish yours, but that if you place it alongside someone else's, together you can think about, well, what would be better for the community, and as opposed to just what would be better for me.
One last thought from you, and just as in terms of what you wish people would take away from some of these videos and some of this project.
I think that not individual story, the power of stories is real. An individual story will give you a small slice, but what we hope is that through listening to lots of different stories around the same theme, we get a more complex picture of what's happening.
Well, you guys have taken on quite a task. So you're going to hang around for a long time and keep doing this?
Seems like it.
Yeah, or at least the Flight Paths Initiative, that's the one we're thinking about in terms of Gary and Lake County and Porter County. We're seeing it at least as a 5 to 7 year project to get the documentary website up, at least.
I love the people who watch public television because they get to see people like you and the dedication you have to these kind of projects, and we want to make sure we hang on to people like you in the community. So thanks for doing this and thanks for being on the show. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having
you,
us.
You bet. It is said, a picture is worth 1,000 words. But what are 1,000 words worth? I have read 1,000 words and thought, what was the writer trying to say? I have listened to 1,000 words and was so confused in the end I wondered, what was that all about? What is 1,000 words? It's about 2 printed pages, single-spaced in a common 12-point font, and probably 5 pages handwritten depending on your penmanship with size, style, and legibility. Let's consider putting the 1,000 words into a speech, conversation, or telling a story. How much time is needed, you ask? It's 5 to 7 minutes. Again, you must consider speed and pauses, plus moments for laughter, applause, or audience abuse. The question is still, what are 1,000 words worth? As I mentioned earlier, it might be nothing, or it could be priceless. I think most of us have had an experience where we were listening to a powerful speaker. He or she was producing a flow of words that held us spellbound. We were soaking in the wisdom, shaken to our core, filled with inspiration, and made to think deeply. The parts that held our greatest attention were the stories, recollections of past events or experiences. Those stories were presented with language which took us on a journey, created pictures in our mind, or made us feel an emotion. I think an incredible speaker can even get us to smell the frying bacon, taste the savory morsel, or feel the touch of a child's hand on our cheek. I've instructed others to use stories if they really want to impact an audience. The more personal, the more powerful. You say, "Oh, I can't speak in front of a crowd." Storytelling and sharing your words of wisdom can be done to one, two, or a few. It does not have to be a huge mass of people in a giant stadium or even a sizable group in a meeting room. Your stories are your life experiences, and they have shaped who you are. Recalling stories you've heard are also great tools. If the story made an impact on you, then it may on others. You often hear my ending remarks on this show anchored with a story. Maybe you can remember one. Now let's end by rearranging the phrase and say, 1,000 words are worth a picture. I'm not sure I can describe a picture with enough detail to impact your life, but I sure can tell a story. Thanks for watching Lakeshore Focus. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's show. Perhaps you have a story you would like to share with us. You can email us or contact us through our website. Both are listed on your screen. We appreciate your support of public television and radio. You make a difference, and as I always say, be sure and join us again next week for another Lakeshore Focus. Until then, I'm Keith Kirkpatrick saying, make a positive difference in our world today.
Programming is supported by NIPSCO. Today's young minds are constantly reimagining what our world will be like tomorrow. That's why NIPSCO is upgrading its infrastructure now, so we're ready for whatever comes next. More information at nipsco.com/future.